I'd like to talk for a little bit about CSS variables and one of the ways in which they are different from Sass variables. Now, for the past few years, I have written most of my styles in Sass, and one of my favorite benefits of Sass is the ability to use variables. So when I first heard of the new CSS variables, I was excited to have that functionality built into CSS. After playing around with them for a bit, I wasn't a fan of the double dashes and variable names, and then in order to use a variable, you have to wrap it in a var function, which felt odd. Since I was already able to use Sass variables, I pretty much ignored the CSS variables. It was when I needed to simplify a system of utility classes that I realized they are indeed different, and they do have a unique benefit. Let's say we have a simple spacing system. We have 7 classes that apply margin to various parts of an element. Each of these classes sets the margin to our spacing variable, which is 1 rem. This system is going to work really well until we want to add different sizes of margin. In order to add these new sizes, we have to make our simple spacing system a bit more complex. Here we want to add 2 new margin sizes. We'll start with our first set of classes, and then for each new margin size, we need to duplicate those classes. First for the small size, and then for the large. We had to make 14 new classes just to add 2 new margin sizes. You can see how this could quickly get out of hand if we have a spacing system that requires a very large variety of sizes. We'll end up with a large list of classes, some of which might never get used. What used to be a simple spacing system has now grown and gotten out of hand. And in order to simplify things, I played around with the code a bit and came up with my dream spacing system. Once again, we start out with our 7 initial classes, but if we look at the bottom, we have 2 new modifier classes. I really wanted the ability to take our spacing variable and update it with a new value, and then have the modifier classes work alongside the first set of classes. If we look at the div example in the HTML, we already have our SPAll class. This is adding 1 rem of margin to all sides of the div. Ideally, we'd be able to add a modifier class of sp_large, that same div, and the margin would be updated to 2 rem. Unfortunately, this doesn't work. At the end of the day, our Sass has to compile down to vanilla CSS in order to be usable. And when we compile the code in our dream system, we lose those modifier classes completely. Since we're only reassigning the variables but not actually using them, our classes are empty. And when we compile the code, Sass will just wipe them away. In order to use our updated variable, we would have to add 7 new classes for each size, and then use the reassigned variable, and we would end up with the same complex spacing system that we were trying to simplify. At this point, I started searching for a way to build this dream spacing system, and I realized that I could do this with CSS variables. Here we have our same dream system, but instead of the Sass variables, we are using CSS variables. If we compile this code, we actually get to keep these classes because this is already vanilla CSS. Now, if we try to apply our modifier class, the element actually updates. Being able to update these variables within classes has allowed us to simplify our complex spacing system. Instead of having 21 classes to represent the 3 margin sizes, we have condensed them down to just 9 classes. Browser support for CSS variables is pretty good. IE 11 and older, however, are an issue. There are polyfills available, but unfortunately the ones that I found they were only able to mimic the functionality of the Sass variables, and we lost the ability to update and scope a variable. So check out the article that goes with this video for links to some of those polyfills, as well as an idea for a Sass mixin that generates fallback classes for old IE. There will also be links to resources throughout the text, including a CodePen collection where I built a series of manageable utility systems that will hopefully give you some ideas to start playing around with CSS variables.